Hello, welcome from central London. We're just a stone's throw away from the Houses of Parliament in Westminster. We're here in Central Hall for this Intelligence Squared debate on the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. Well, that's a subject that's going to generate a lot of heat, I think, and some light too, I hope. I'm delighted to be chair of this debate. We have a panel which includes some of the most provocative, intelligent and stimulating commentators and practitioners on the subject. Arguing for the motion, the Archbishop of Abuja in Nigeria, John Onaiyekan, the British Conservative MP, Anne Widdecombe. Arguing against the motion, the actor, broadcaster and author, Stephen Fry, and the journalist and commentator, Christopher Hitchens. Well, our first speaker is John Onaiyekan, His Grace, the Archbishop of Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. And His Grace is one of Africa's best known, most respected commentators of the Church, the Catholic Church. So please make your way to the podium, speak at the microphone.
Friends, I certainly must say I'm grateful to be here, because for me it's more than a matter of debate, because that's what my life is all about. If I didn't believe that the Catholic Church is a force for good, I would not devote my whole life to precisely working in that institution, hoping that I am involved in something that is good for the whole world. You see, for me to be a Catholic is a gift of God. Let me start with the word church, the Catholic Church. Obviously, it means many things to many people, but I think as an archbishop, I should be in a position to say what it does mean, especially to us Catholics. Yes, the Catholic Church is an institution, and some people say it is perhaps the best organized institution in the world, but that's not really the essence of our church. We should go beyond the institution, and for us, the church is first and foremost a community of believers. And this is a community of believers that is spread all over the world, made up of all kinds of people. And the institution itself, as well as those whom we normally consider church people dressed up like me, for example, we are there only because of that huge community of people who are Catholics. I'm stressing this so that when you are asking yourself, is the Catholic Church a force for good in the world, don't look at me, don't look at Benedict XVI, look at the Catholics all over the world. That the church is a force for good in the world seems obviously to me is quite obvious. The question probably we should ask is, what kind of force? There was once an arrogant dictator who asked in disdain, how many battalions has the Pope? Obviously, he completely missed the point. It's not about military force or physical force, but it is about force. It's about the force of a spiritual message, the force of values, which has stood the test of 2,000 years, and not only 2,000 years in time, but has spread its message all over the world among different kinds of people, different races. We must also not forget the sheer weight of the number of Catholics. I have checked the statistics, and we are told that now we have about 1.2 billion Catholics all over the world, out of a population of 6.6 billion, 17.3%. And these are young, these are made up of all categories of people, young and old, women and men, peasant farmers and high-tech professionals, simple citizens, and even heads of states and world leaders. This is the great army that is a great force for good in the world, and whatever they are doing, we consider it as being done largely also as a result of the spirit that guides them. Independent statistics have shown that the Catholic Church is doing far more than its numbers and its population would probably suggest. The action of the Church is most significant in communities that are reduced to poverty and misery by human neglect and sometimes by hostile environments. Talking of statistics, I spoke recently with the Director General of UNAIDS, which is the United Nations Agency for HIV and AIDS, and he said that 26% of the health institutions in the world directly involved with the treatment of HIV and AIDS are run by the Catholic Church. And please note that it is a well-known policy of our church that whenever we are engaged in social welfare work, it is always given to all without any discrimination, whether you believe or not, irrespective of creed. Indeed, it is an integral part of our faith that our church is made up of saints and sinners. We are all struggling towards that perfection which Jesus asked us all to first follow. Nor am I denying that the Catholic Church has always and everywhere done excellent things, even sometimes in high levels. But this, again, only proves that we are in this world. Even the late Pope John Paul II had no difficulty at all in admitting the mistakes that people who claim to be Catholics and working in the name of the church have done in the past, and even apologized. And such gestures of apology is very rare in our world today. Let me conclude by drawing your attention to one particular aspect of my faith which I admire greatly. We are very open to dealing and moving and collaborating with others. And I think this is very important for the world of our days. We are talking of the world of today. We need more and more efforts to link hands across all divides so that we can manage to make our planet a better place, a world of justice and peace. Is there still anybody here who still doubts whether the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world? Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Christopher Hitchens. He's arguing against the motion. He is a writer, journalist, and commentator, particularly well known for his trenchant and views and very original thinking. So, Christopher Hitchens, let us hear what you have to say. Your time starts now. Please make your way to the podium.
Now, I'm sorry, though, to have to begin by disagreeing with His Grace. If you're going to be a serious grown-up person and appear to defend the Catholic Church in public in front of an educated and literate audience, you simply have to start by making a great number of heartfelt apologies and requests for contrition and forgiveness. Now, you might ask, you're fully entitled to ask, brothers and sisters, who am I to say that? Well, in the Jubilee Millennium year of 2000, the Vatican spokesman, Bishop Piero Marini, said, explaining a whole sermon of apology given by His Holiness the Pope, that was supposed to cover the entire history of the Church in its Jubilee year, that, I'll quote Bishop Marini directly, said, "Given the number of sins we've committed in the course of 20 centuries, reference to them must necessarily be rather summary." Well, I think Bishop Marini had that just about right. I'll have to be summary too, but I think he said just about the least of it. His Holiness on that occasion, it was March the 12th, 2000, if you wish to look it up, begged forgiveness for, among some other things, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecution of the Jewish people, injustice towards women, that's half the human race right there, and the forced conversion of indigenous peoples, especially in South America. And that followed a whole series of preceding apologies, or apologies, I would say, of a kind, made by the late Pope John Paul, who, it troubles me not at all to say, was a very impressive and serious human being. It followed no less than 94, count them, public recognitions on his part of appalling crime and error and cruelty and stupidity and offences to the free intelligence, ranging from, I shall be summary, like Bishop Marini, the African slave trade, apologized for in 1995, the admission that Galileo was right about the relationship between the sun and the earth and other orbs, which came in 1992, one might add. No, I won't say, it's too easy to say better late than never. Here, I said it. To violence and torture, legalized torture. Torture was legalized and institutionalized by the Roman pontiff during the Counter-Reformation. That came in 1995. And for silence during Hitler's final solution, or Shoah, as well as, in 1999, coming in just under the Millennium Jubilee wire, an apology for the burning alive in the main square of Prague of the great Czech Protestant Jan Hus. Since that big fiesta of forgiveness that began in, or culminated, I might say, in 2000, fiesta of forgiveness, fiesta of asking for it, the papacy is also asked to be forgiven for the sack of Constantinople and the massacre of Byzantine Christianity in April 1204 as part of the Fourth Crusade, the anathema on all Eastern Orthodox Christians as unbelievers, heretics, and people dwelling outside the health of the Church was lifted only in 1964. I call your attention to that. He also expressed sorrow about the murder and forced conversion of Serbian Orthodox Christians in the Balkans during the Second World War. And it doesn't end there. There are smaller but significant, equally significant, avowals of a very bad conscience. These have included regret for the rape and the torture of orphans and other children in church-run schools in almost every country on earth, from Ireland to Australia. And I'm pleased to see that due reconsideration is now being given, and may in fact have been given, to the hellish, I choose the word carefully, doctrine of limbo, St. Augustine's cruel and stupid disposal problem, solution to a non-existent problem, that is to say, the destination of the souls of unbaptized children. Up until now, Catholic parents have been taught that's where their unbaptized children went, a form of torture that's sometimes worse than the physical. Now it seems that this piece of Augustinian sadism is undergoing reconsideration as well. But remember, this is from a church that, on the whole, cannot err. We still await a more direct admission. For example, I give some suggestions of my own while we're at it. I would like them to take back the Concordat made with Adolf Hitler, the first treaty he ever signed, giving the Church a monopoly over education in Germany in exchange for the dissolution of the Catholic Centre Party to give the Nazi Party a clear run. I'd have apologized for the Lateran Pact with Mussolini, myself, also the first treaty ever signed by that fascist dictator. I would also think I'd want to reconsider the fact that Father Tiso, head of the Nazi puppet state in Slovakia, was a priest in holy orders, that the Croatian fascist puppet state, the Ustaša state of Ante Pavelic, was also operating under full clerical protection and disguise, as was the regime of General Franco and the dictator Antonio Salazar. And I'd also want, I really think I would beg forgiveness for this, I don't think the German church should have asked Hitler's birthday to be celebrated from the pulpit every year until he died. These are very serious matters, and they're not to be laughed off by references to the occasional work of Catholic charities. But I draw your attention not just to the apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but to the evasive and euphemistic form that they take. Joseph Ratzinger, the current Pope, considered by some, by Catholics, to be the Vicar of Christ on earth, says of Indians, of the Indians who were massacred in the course of conversion in Brazil, after the apology had been made to them, he said, nonetheless, it must be remembered that before we came to convert them, they were silently awaiting the arrival of the church. I don't think that's a very genuine kind of apology to you. In his comment, one of the few he's made, on the institutionalization of rape and torture and maltreatment of children in Catholic institutions, he has said, it's a very severe crisis which involves us, he said, in the following: in the need for applying to these victims the most loving pastoral care. Well, I'm sorry. They've already had that. And to say that this is the responsibility laid upon you by the horrific admission that you've already had to make is not accepting responsibility in any adult sense. When I say child abuse was institutional, how dare I say so? How can I prove it? How can I prove such a thing? Well, I'll ask His Grace, and I'll ask Anne Widdecombe. Where is Cardinal Bernard Law now? Where is he? Where is the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, whose resignation was indignantly demanded, finally, by 50 members of the Church and by the whole laity of Massachusetts, who also demanded his prosecution for the promotion and protection and covering up and apology for and defense of people whose crimes against children are too revolting to specify. And he's not in the jurisdiction of Massachusetts now, as perhaps you know. He's the Supreme Vicar of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, personally appointed by the Pope to that as well as many other important sinecures. And in 2005, this man, a fugitive from justice and from complicity in the filthiest crime that it's possible for a human being to imagine, was one of those voting in conclave to decide who the next Vicar of Christ on earth will be. I don't know. I think I'd like to hear a bit more shame about this. I think I'd like to see a bit more confrontation with the reality of the business. Now, this is a serious question, as I've said. Anne Widdecombe very often, rightly, in my opinion, attacks the climate of moral relativism and of anything goes that can very well be the handmaiden of postmodernist, hedonistic culture. I very often am glad that she points these things out. But the rape and torture of children is not something to be relativized. It's not something to be excused as a few bad priests. It's certainly not to be excused by the hideously false claim made by some Catholic conservatives that this wouldn't have happened if queers hadn't been allowed into the church. I'm sorry to say that queerdom in the church is an old story too. And it's worse, it's much worse than pornography, and it's much worse than bad language on TV. And it's the crime that cries out for punishment. It's the thing that if we were accused of on this side of the House, we would die rather than admit. And if we were guilty of it, would kill ourselves. And it's the one thing the Church has decided to excuse itself for under this papacy. The same euphemism comes in the term "some Christians" that is used in all the apologies about the Crusades, the Inquisitions, the anti-Semitic pogroms, and all the rest of it. It said some Christians fell into error. Some Christians allowed themselves to be deceived in this way and to act against the gospel. Well, anti-Semitism was preached as an official doctrine of the Church until 1964. Do you think that might have something to do with public opinion in Austria and Bavaria and Poland and Lithuania? That the Jewish people were accused collectively as a people of deicide, of the crime of the murder of God in the figure of Jesus of Nazareth. And that anathema on them was not lifted until 1964, well after the perpetrators of the Holocaust had stood trial in secular courts and been rightly punished for their actions. How can this Church say it has any moral superiority? It has difficulty catching up to what ordinary people regard as common moral and ethical sense, and it still can't make itself apologize properly, and I'll tell you why. Because, and I'll quote again from the encyclicals, it is said of the Crusades, of the complicity with the Holocaust, of the political and diplomatic alliance with fascism, of all of these things, it is said, well, violence was committed, but I'll stress this, I'll underline it, I'll quote directly, in the service of the truth. So how is an apology possible? How is any understanding or undertaking or firm purpose of amendment to be allowed when the original sin, so to say, the radix malorum, the fons et origo, the problem in the first place, is the belief on the part of this Church that it does possess a truth that we don't have, and it does have a God-given right, a warrant, a mandate of heaven to tell other people what to do, not just in their public, but in their private lives. And until that is changed, till that fantastic and sinister and non-founded claim is changed, these crimes will go on repeating themselves, being partially denied, partially admitted when it's too late to do anything else, and covered up. Behind all these crimes and miseries is the denial of what we on this side of the House affirm, which is that the only little candle of hope that our species does possess, our poor, bare, forked, primate, mammalian species, of whom you have two such splendid examples on this side of the House and not bad on the other tonight, is the unfettered intelligence, the method of free inquiry in philosophy and in science, and the refusal to admit that any one person can tell you not to do that. It's the one thing I might say, I think, is, if not sacrosanct or sacred, is, shall we say, essential. And the Church has always stood and still stands against it. Now, in the little time remaining to me, I'll just propose a few more apologies that we might hope to hear in the immediate future. Because there will come a time when the Church will issue apologies and explanations and half-baked appeals for forgiveness for things it's still doing. The readmission as a bishop of Roger Williamson, a member of Marcel Lefebvre's fanatical, hysterical breakaway sect, so-called Society of St. Pius X. Roger Williamson, found hiding in a reactionary, quasi-fascistic establishment in Argentina, has long been a believer that, I'll put this shortly, that the Holocaust did not occur, but the Jews did kill Christ. In other words, genocide no, deicide yes. He was quite rightly excommunicated some years ago, along with several other members of his ratbag organization. But Joseph Ratzinger's invited him back into the communion because to him, having this man, this liar, this fraud, this racist, in the church is more important because it's church unity than the things that he said and done and continues to stand for. Is this not a crying scandal? I think that there will be an apology for what happened in Rwanda, the most Catholic country in Africa, one of the most Catholic countries in the world, where priests and nuns and bishops are on trial for inciting from their pulpits and on the church's radio stations and newspapers the massacre of their brothers and sisters. And the papacy was silent on this appalling occasion, and everyone in Rwanda knows it. And there hasn't yet been a properly written apology for that disgrace. Staying in Africa, I think it will one day be admitted with shame that it might have been in error to say that AIDS is bad as a disease, very bad, but not quite as bad as condoms are bad, or not as immoral in the same way. I say it in the presence of His grace, and I say it to His face. The preachings of His church are responsible for the death and suffering and misery of millions of his brother and sister Africans, and he should apologize for it. He should show some shame. Fourth, for condemning my friend Stephen Fry for his nature, for saying you couldn't be a member of our church, you're born in sin. There's a revolting piece of casuistry that's sometimes offered on this point. Yeah, we hate the sin only. We love the sinner. Stephen is, I'm sorry to say, not quite like other girls. It's his nature. Actually, he is like other girls in that he's, when I last checked, absolutely boy mad. He's not being condemned for what he does, he's being condemned for what he is. You're a child made in the image of God. Oh, no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful, it's inhuman, it's obscene, and it comes from a clutch of hysterical, sinister virgins who've already betrayed their charge in the children of their own church. For shame, for shame. And finally, under this Pope, as if it wasn't bad enough to try and restore the Latin Mass to gratify the mad, fascistic followers of Archbishop Lefebvre, but to begin again to offer remission of sin, as Bishop Ratzinger, the Pope, I'll call him the Pope for heaven's sake, wants to do. If you come to a Catholic youth festival in Sydney, Australia, where I just was, you'll get a certain remission from purgatory or hell. It may be temporary. If you come a lot and you give a lot, you'll get possibly permanent remission from the eternal punishment that they don't know any more about than you and I do. This is the sale of indulgences blatantly, openly. It's the same temptation that was offered to those who set off on that Fourth Crusade that's just been apologized for, and killed all the Jews of Europe on their way, sacked Byzantine Christianity when they got to Constantinople, and then went on to massacre the Arabs and Muslims. They were offered paradise if they died committing these terrible crimes against humanity. But if you see what I mean, therefore, the stimulus to crime, the impetus to crime, the belief in certainty, the belief that a divine warrant entitles you to do whatever you like, is the sin that must be cancelled, that must be annealed, that must somehow be apologized for. Now, I don't wish any. That's perfect timing. I don't wish any ill on any fellow primate or mammal of mine, even if this primate or mammal claims to be a primate in possession of a secret that's denied to me. I can forgive even that, because I live in a country where their reign doesn't run, their writ doesn't apply, and they can't burn me and silence me and censor me any more than they can tell my wife that she can't use contraception, or any more than they can really tell Stephen that he's a beast. So I don't at all look forward to the death of Joseph Ratzinger. I don't. Or any other pope. Not really. Except for one tiny reason which I ought to confess and share with you. When he dies, there's quite a long interval till the conclave can meet. Maybe Cardinal Law will still be on it, to pick another pope. Sometimes it goes on for months till they get the white smoke. And for that whole time, that whole interval, it's a delicious, lucid interlude, there isn't anyone on earth who claims to be infallible. Isn't that nice? All I want to propose in closing is this, that if the human species is to rise to the full height that's demanded by its dignity and by its intelligence, we must all of us move to a state of affairs where that condition is permanent. And I think we should get on with it. Okay, thank you for having me.
Well, Christopher, thank you very much for all that. Our next speaker is going to have her work cut out because she's speaking in favour of the motion that the Catholic Church is a force for good. The Conservative MP and former government minister, Anne Widdecombe, she's as well known for her religious views as for her politics. If you recall, she left the Church of England in 1992 in a blaze of publicity when it allowed the ordination of women priests. The following year, she converted to Catholicism and has become one of the most vocal and staunchest defenders of the Catholic Church since then. Anne Widdecombe, the floor is yours.
If apologies are due tonight, they are due from Christopher Hitchens, who has just run through one of the longest series of misrepresentations of the Catholic Church that I have heard in a long time. He has said, with that certainty which characterises his utterances, that the Catholic Church has had a history of anti-Semitism. Let us just look at the record of the Catholic Church. When the Jewish community was under the most serious threat that it has faced in recent centuries, and just look at the role that the Catholic Church played in the last World War. Mr. Hitchens ignores the thousands of Jews who were secreted and rescued in churches and monasteries throughout Europe. He ignores the 3,000 Jews who, in the course of that conflict, took refuge in the Pope's own summer palace. And coming nearer to our day, of course, Christopher Hitchens is right, and who could possibly dispute with him, that the abuse of children, of innocent children, is one, in fact, it is the worst offence that anybody can commit. Of that, no doubt. But again, he seems to think that the Catholic Church should have had some unique insight, which demonstrably was lacking in society as a whole. Do not expect the Catholic Church somehow, when that was the state of knowledge at the time, to have acted in a unique and completely different way. In retrospect, yes, of course. In retrospect, yup. In retrospect, it should have done. So should the magistrates. So should the Samaritans. So should the National Council of Civil Liberties. But when we ask whether the Catholic Church is a force for good, let's just try to imagine a world today without, for example, the billions of pounds that are poured into overseas aid by the Catholic Church, contributing year on year more than any single nation. Imagine the developing world had been left without the input of the medicine and the education that was brought to it by the missions. Imagine the absence of those collections Sunday upon Sunday for famine relief. Imagine the absence of the church in the local community. We play a vital role. And you don't need to be a Catholic to acknowledge that we play that role. What is the church? It is its members. It is the nuns and the monks and the priests and the lay workers and the congregations. It is not just the hierarchy of the church. And I believe that the church to which I belong is a massive, massive force for good. But let us not just keep the debate at that level. I knew somehow that when we were here tonight, we would be discussing child abuse and condoms. They came in the end. I almost thought we were going to get through an entire speech without condoms from Christopher Hitchens, but we got them at the end. But that is not what the Catholic Church is about. It isn't only about the physical relief of the poor. It isn't only about the work it does on earth, but it is the message that it preaches. And that message is one of hope. That message is one of salvation. And it is all very well for some people in their intellectual arrogance to say, we can do without that. But actually, billions of people across the world live by that message of hope and of salvation. They try to live by the commandments and also by the interpretation of those commandments by Christ. Yeah, sometimes they fail. Sometimes their leaders fail. Human beings do fail. But overwhelmingly, I say to you tonight with no apology or whatever, that a world without the Catholic Church would be poorer, would be more hopeless, and would be a worse place in which to live.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Anne Widdecombe. And our final speaker is against the motion, Stephen Fry, a bit of an all-rounder, really. Stephen can turn his hand to many things. Stephen, let's hear your views.
There are occasions, as Gwendolyn remarked, in The Importance of Being Earnest, when it becomes more than a moral duty to speak one's mind, it becomes a pleasure. And this is one such occasion with my trusty Hitch by my side. I am very proud to be here, but also very nervous, very worried. I've been nervous all day, and the reason I've been nervous is quite simple, and that is that this motion matters to me. It matters to me greatly. It's not a joke, it's not a game, it's not just a debate. I genuinely believe that the Catholic Church is not, to put it at its mildest, a force for good in the world. And therefore it is important for me to try and marshal my facts as well I can to explain why I think that. But I want first of all to say that I have no quarrel, no argument, and I wish to express no contempt for individual devout and pious members of that church. They are welcome to their sacraments, they're welcome to their reliquaries and to their Blessed Virgin Mary. They're welcome to their faith, to the importance they place in it, to the comfort and the joy that they receive from it. All of that is absolutely fine by me. It would be impertinent and wrong of me to express any antagonism towards any individual who wishes to find salvation in whatever form they wish to express it. That, to me, is sacrosanct as much as any article of faith is sacrosanct to anyone of any church or any faith in the world. It's very important. It's also very important to me, as it happens, that I have my own beliefs. They are a belief in the Enlightenment. They are a belief in the eternal adventure of trying to discover moral truth in the world. Discover. It's a terribly important word to which we might return. It's a fight, it's an empirical fight. It's one that was begun in the middle of the last millennium. It's given the name the Enlightenment. And there is nothing, sadly, that the Catholic Church and its hierarchs likes to do more than to attack the Enlightenment. It did so at the time. Reference was made to Galileo and the fact that he was tortured for trying to explain the Copernican theory of the universe. That's history. History, as Miss Widdecombe has reminded us, is irrelevant. It's not important. All that matters now is that billions of pounds go out of this extraordinary institution to relieve the poor around the world and make the world a better place. History is of no importance whatsoever. Well, I beg to differ. History whinnies and quivers and vibrates in all of us, in this hall, in this square mile. Let's think about this square mile. I'll come back to it in a moment. But first, Christopher made mention of limbo. It seems so tedious and so silly, one of those little casuistic games that Thomists and others play. Aquinas and Augustine of Hippo both proposed this extraordinary idea that babies who were unbaptized would not know heaven. They also proposed the idea of purgatory, which doesn't exist in the Bible. There's absolutely no evidence for it. However, what an extraordinary, brilliant coup to imagine such a thing as purgatory. That a soul needs to be prayed for in order to go to heaven, in order to turn left when he enters the aeroplane of heaven and get a first-class seat. That he needs to be prayed for, and for many hundreds, indeed over 1,000 years, you'll be amazed what generous terms those prayers came at. Sometimes as little or as 2/3 of a year's salary could ensure that a dead loved one would go to heaven. And money could ensure that your baby, your dead child, your dead uncle, your dead mother could go to heaven. And if you were rich enough, you could have a chantry built, and monks would permanently sing prayers so that that existence in heaven for the child would go up and up and up until they were at the table of the Lord themselves. Now, all this is in the past and is irrelevant. I cede to Anne Widdecombe how irrelevant it is, except in one thing. This church is founded on the principle of intercession. Only through the apostolic succession, only through the laying on of hands from this Galilean carpenter, whom we can all admire, only from the laying on of hands to his apostles, to St. Peter, to the other bishops, all the way down to everyone consecrated in this room. Anyone ordained here will know they have this extraordinary power to change the molecules of wine into blood, literally, to change the molecules of paste bread into flesh, literally, and to forgive the sins of the peasants and the poor whom they routinely exploit around the planet. Only this church has this extraordinary principle that it is through these male priests, and only male priests, that this is given. It is a doctrinal fact. It is more than a doctrinal fact, it is a dogma. Extra ecclesiam nulla salus. Outside the church, there is no salvation. That is a dogma of the church that has been used to excuse all the missionary zeal, all the rape and torture of the Aztecs and the Incas, all the horrors of South America and Africa and the Philippines and the rest of the world, to which other churches and other cultures have also their guilt to admit. It's not unique to the Catholic Church, and I never said it was, and the motion doesn't say it was, or at least the opposition of the motion does not arrogate to the Catholic Church uniquely this sin. However, the particular nature of the exploitation of the poor, the vulnerable, and the young. If I were to talk to a priest now, believe me, that priest would be the most worldly, charming, self-deprecating, snobbish in a Ronald Knox, Alfred Gilby sort of way. He would be lovely. He would smoke. Gosh, how daring. He would be a sort of ha-ha-ha priest, and the superstition and the nonsense that we read about of the church, it's absolute. Don't pay any attention, Stephen. Just join Farm Street or the Brompton Oratory and have a marvellous time as a Catholic, and everything is lovely and splendid. But be poor and ignorant, and my goodness me, every single detail of damnation and original sin and of any possibility of your complaining or asking to think for yourself. I said, let's think of this square mile. Just imagine in this square mile how many people were burned for reading the Bible in English. And one of the principal burners and torturers of those who tried to read the Bible in English here in London was Thomas More. You may know if you've read the novel Wolf Hall, which won the Man Booker Prize just the other day. Now, that's a long time ago. It's not relevant, except that it was only last century that Thomas More was made a saint, and it was only in the year 2000 that the last Pope, the Pole, he made Thomas More the patron saint of politicians. This is a man who put people on the rack for daring to own a Bible in English. He tortured them for owning a Bible in their own language. The idea that the Catholic Church exists to disseminate the word of the Lord is nonsense. It is the only owner of the truth for the billions that it likes to boast about, because those billions are uneducated and poor, as again it likes to boast about. But they are the ones it can tell and bully and domineer. And then we come to children. Well, it's all very well to say the world didn't know better. The world had no knowledge of how dangerous a crime child abuse was. I want to read you some of the words of Ratzinger, the current Pope. It staggers me to admit that he is the head of state of a country. Incidentally, Anne Widdecombe said, "We didn't have the power of a nation-state." Yes, you do. You are a nation-state. Yes, I wrote it down. You mentioned that. You are a nation-state, and it is no accident that the UN Cairo Population Conference, when they were trying to do something about the world's population spinning out of control, Vatican City, as a nation-state represented at that conference, made a joint statement with the Islamic countries of the world, notably the most extreme Islamic countries of the world, led by Saudi Arabia, and it began, "On behalf of the revealed religions of the world, ... And what it did was essentially hobble and veto any possibility of women's sexual freedom in the world, because, as we know, the Islamic religion and the Catholic Church have never been anything other than implacably opposed to women's choice in their own bodies and their destinies. However, so, Ratzinger, in 2003, he was prefect, I'm not making this up, he was prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. And it was his job to deal with the child abuse scandal that was brewing. His first act was to write a letter to Catholic bishops ordering them, on pain of excommunication, not to talk to the police or anyone else. Investigations should be handled, he wrote, and I'm quoting that letter, in the most secretive way, restrained by perpetual silence. The Mexican founder of the Legion of Christ movement, Maciel Degollado, was protected from his own catalogue of child abuse, which is horrific. One cannot put on trial so close a friend of the Pope, said Ratzinger. When the allegations could no longer be denied, Maciel was sentenced to a life of prayer and penitence. And Ratzinger described the whole affair, and that of Bernard Law of Boston, to which my colleague also referred, as causing suffering for the church and for me personally. He also said the answer would be to stop homosexuals from being allowed into the church. Now, it's perhaps unfair of me as a gay man to moan that this enormous institution, which is the largest and most powerful church on earth, has over 1 billion, as they like to tell us, members, each one of whom is under strict instructions to believe the dogmas of the church, but may wrestle with them personally, of course. It's a little hard for me to know that I am disordered, or again, to quote Ratzinger, that I am guilty of a moral evil, simply by fulfilling my sexual destiny as I see it. It's hard for me to be told that I'm evil, because I think of myself as someone who is filled with love, whose only purpose in life was to achieve love, and who feels love for so much of nature and the world and for everything else, and who, like anybody decent and of an education, realizes that in order to achieve and receive love, it's a struggle. It's not one that needs a pope to tell you how to do it. It certainly isn't one who needs a pope to tell you that you're evil. With 6% of all teenage suicides being gay teenage suicides, we certainly don't need the stigmatization, the victimization that leads to the playground bullying when people say you're a disordered, morally evil individual. That's not nice. It isn't nice. The kind of cruelty in Catholic education, the kind of let's not call it child abuse, it was child rape. The kind of child rape that went on systematically for so long. Let's imagine that we can overlook this and say it is nothing whatever to do with the structure and nature of the Catholic Church and the twisted, neurotic and hysterical way that its leaders are chosen. The celibacy, the nuns, the monks, the priesthood. This is not natural and normal, ladies and gentlemen, in 2009. It really isn't. I'm sorry. For me to be called a pervert by these extraordinarily sexually dysfunctional people, I don't think human history has ever had more. I have to say, this is not a problem that necessarily is permanent. I like to believe that in 10 years' time I could come back and argue the opposite. Even though I've talked about the history and the structural problems of this benighted institution, and the cruelty and the unpleasantness it has caused around the world, I have yet to approach one of the subjects dearest to my heart. I've made 3 documentary films on the subject of AIDS in Africa. My particular love is the country of Uganda. It's one of the countries I love most in the world. Been there many times. I've interviewed Yoweri Museveni and his wife Janet before, unfortunately, she suddenly saw God. There was a period when Uganda had the worst incidence of HIV/AIDS in the world. I went to Rakai, the village where it was first spotted. But through an amazing initiative called ABC, abstinence, be faithful, correct use of condoms, those 3, I'm not denying that abstinence is a very good way of not getting AIDS. It really is. It works. So does being faithful. But so do condoms. And do not deny it. And this Pope, not satisfied with saying condoms are against our religion, please consider first, abstinence, second, being faithful to your partner. He spreads the lie that condoms actually increase the incidence of AIDS. He actually makes sure that aid is conditional on saying no to condoms. I have been to, there's a hospital in Bwindi in the west of Uganda where I do quite a lot of work. It is unbelievable, the pain and suffering you see. Now, yes, it is true, abstinence will stop it. It's the strange thing about this church. It is obsessed with sex. Absolutely obsessed. Now, they will say They will say, we with our permissive society and our rude jokes are obsessed. No, we have a healthy attitude. We like it, it's fun, it's jolly. Because it's a primary impulse, it can be dangerous and dark and difficult. It's a bit like food in that respect, only even more exciting. The only people who are obsessed with food are anorexics and the morbidly obese. And that, in erotic terms, is the Catholic Church in a nutshell. So, all I want to say, really, is that we're here in the Methodist Hall. I'm not trying to argue against religion on this occasion. I'm not saying there's any... I understand the desire of anybody to seek spiritual rewards in a complex and difficult-to-understand world. We don't know why we're here, where we're going. We want answers. We love the idea of answers. How marvelous it would be. But there are other choices. There are Quakers. Who could possibly quarrel with a Quaker? With their pacifism, with their openness, with their ease, with their simplicity, with their refusal to tell anybody what's a dogma and what isn't, even with Methodists also. I'm not saying Protestantism is the answer against Catholicism. I am merely saying there are all kinds of ways we can search for the truth. You do not need this imperial panoply of marble and gold. Do you know who would be the last person ever to be accepted as a prince of the church? The Galilean carpenter, that Jew. They would kick him out before he tried to cross the threshold. He would be so ill at ease in the church. That simple and remarkable man, if he said the things that he was said to have said, what would he think? What would he think of St. Peter's? What would he think of the wealth and the power and the self-justification and the wheedling apologies? What would he think of a man who calls himself the father, a celibate who dared to lecture people on what family values are? What would he think of any of that? He would be horrified. But there is a solution. There is an answer. There is redemption available for all of us and any one of us. And for the Catholic Church, funnily enough, I think it's a novel by Morris West. The Pope could decide that all this power, all this wealth, this hierarchy of princes and bishops and archbishops and priests and monks and nuns could be sent out in the world with money and art treasures to put them back in the countries that they once raped and violated, whose original systems of animism and belief and simplicity they told would take them straight to hell. They could give that money away, and they could concentrate on the apparent essence of their belief. And then I would stand here and say the Catholic Church may well be a force for good in the world. But until that day, it is not. Thank you.
Well, Stephen Fry, thank you very much. So you've heard all our four speakers. It's going to be your turn, the audience, next. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about what you want to ask our panelists, any questions or comments you may wish to make. Because I'm going to give you now the result of that vote that you all gave when you were coming in here to Central Hall. The motion is the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. In favour of the motion were 678. Against the motion that the Catholic Church is a force for good was 1,102. Big difference. However, 346 of you were undecided. So, Archbishop and Anne Widdecombe, you're going to have to not win over the undecided, but actually convert some from the other side. Let's see if we can sway any opinions here amongst all of you by listening to some points that you wish to raise with the panel. And then we're going to ask you to vote again. Now, put your hand up if you want to speak. A question. The lady with the spectacles, yeah.
I would like to ask Mr. Hitchens if he is only against the Catholic Church or against all religions.
Okay, go back there, the lady in the pink.
Hi there. This is a question for Christopher Hitchens. Many people today feel that we're really living in some kind of moral crisis, and you can see that all around us. Now, if one thing that the Catholic Church does do for good, in my opinion, is give us the Ten Commandments, a very basic, obvious way of giving us some kind of moral guidance. Would you not agree with that?
Yeah. The lady in front began by asking me, do I reserve this condemnation only for the Holy Roman Church and not for other Catholics, for example, like Byzantine Catholics and Protestants and so on? I think they're all the same equivalent glimpses of the identical untruth. Now, of the commandments, the first 2 or 3 are entirely about fearing the author of the orders. Entirely about being terrified of someone who you're enjoined to love. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but the idea of compulsory love has always struck me as a bit shady, especially if you're ordered to love someone who you absolutely must fear. So the first 3 are, look out for me and keep at least one day of mine where you'll be terrified full time.
Anne Widdecombe, 10 Commandments, firm bedrock of moral teaching.
I would have thought it quite obvious that the Ten Commandments set out a blueprint for a moral and successful society. Let us just look at some of them. Honour thy father and thy mother. Think of today's disrespect. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not covet. Tell that to the bankers with their bonuses.
Okay, Archbishop, do you want to come in briefly on this?
The 10 Commandments are in the Bible, but my father knew it before he became a Christian. All African religions recognized those basic norms of morality. Everybody knows that.
All right. Let's take some more questions from the floor. Okay.
This is a very simple question for Anne Widdecombe. You might think it may be a naive question. If so, I'd be very happy to be educated. Why is it wrong for a woman to become a priest, but perfectly acceptable for a woman such as yourself to become an MP?
Okay, thanks. I think we're going to go just here next. Yeah.
Anne raised a point regarding the billions that are poured into Africa. I respect your faith. I respect the message you give. But why, to pass that message on, do you need the finery that you wear? Do you need the palace of the Vatican?
Okay. Point made. I think we're going to go here.
Archbishop, of which current Roman Catholic policy are you most ashamed?
Current Catholic policy are you most ashamed?
I don't know whether you are serious in that question or you just want to provoke, because if all our Catholic policies are not just dreamt overnight by the Pope or anybody. If it is a Catholic policy, it is reasonable, it is based on our traditions and scriptures, and there's none about which I'm ashamed.
Okay, and the other question about...
and I don't know what billions of that he says the Vatican has. The billions of this world, I think, are not in the Vatican. We know where they are, and they are not coming to Africa. On the contrary, Africa has been sucked dry by those people, those multinationals. They are the ones who should be bringing our money back to us. I think we are targeting the wrong place. I come from Africa, and the funds that come from church agencies for us are very important.
And would you come one specific question to you? Why not women priests in the Catholic Church?
Well, no, the specific question was, why is it not all right for a woman to be a priest, but it is for a woman to be an MP? That was the specific question.
All right.
And I have to say to you, I mean, that really does betray a vast ignorance. A member of Parliament, male or female, does not stand in persona Christi at the point of consecration. But I don't believe that it is any more possible for a woman to represent Christ at the point of consecration than for a man to be the Virgin Mary.
Okay, thanks. Lots of hands up, and I really do want to go around everybody. So, panel, if you could keep your responses to the point as much as you can. Up there, please.
Well, question to Stephen Fry. I'm a Catholic, but I like you a lot. And then I don't know that the Catholic Church condemns homosexuality as such, only recommends chastity for everybody. And then, if I am not married, I should be chaste. Either I am homosexual or heterosexual.
Okay, all right, thank you. Now.
Hi, question for Anne Widdecombe, actually. You accused Christopher Hitchens of judging the Catholic Church by the standards of the time, but surely the truths in your doctrines are either eternal or they're not.
Okay. Stephen Fry, the question about the Catholic Church apparently doesn't condemn homosexuality, that question asked.
Well, I'm afraid it simply does. It does condemn it, yes. It calls it the official word is disorder, but it was refined by the current pontiff, Ratzinger, who called it a moral evil. But on the other hand, we must remember, as the point that was made, is that the Church is very loose on moral evils, because although they try to accuse people like me who believe in the empiricism and the Enlightenment of somehow what they call moral relativism, as if it's some appalling sin, where what it actually means is thought, they, for example, thought that slavery was perfectly fine. Absolutely okay, and then they didn't. And what is the point of the Catholic Church if it says, oh, well, we couldn't know better because nobody else did? Then what are you for?
Okay. Can you just clarify for us on this thing about homosexuality? The Catholic Church condemns the act but not the individual. Did Jesus Christ himself actually say anything about homosexuality?
No.
That is a wrong question in this regard. because we are not aware about homosexuality, the morality of homosexuality being a matter that drew the attention of Jesus. But Jesus certainly spoke about the Ten Commandments and adultery. I do not think we should deny the Church the right to propound its own doctrines. You are not obliged to take it.
Let's hear some more from the floor, and then we'll come. Yeah, go on.
Our life is based on the life of Jesus Christ, not on emotion or based on the way the world is going. So I thank all the people who are listening, and I think the message we are getting here will lead us to live a good life.
Okay, thanks. Let's just get through some more comments. Okay, yeah, briefly, please, briefly.
I spent 38 years of my life as a Catholic, and then I saw the light. And my life now is going back and forth to Africa, and next month I go to Uganda, and I'm working on trying to stop mothers dying in pregnancy and childbirth. What I'm saying is, please, please, reverse the rule on condoms and family planning and contraception and save more lives, save thousands and thousands of lives.
Let's keep this moving. Briefly, please.
As a Catholic, I'm actually very pleased to be here this evening to hear two sides of a very important argument. And the positive thing I take away is that the Catholic Church can take the opportunity to reflect upon these comments, and that we look for the future. And it's by actually accepting these comments and by looking for a way forward that the Church can actually grow and have a more important part of the world.
All right. Thank you. I can't take any more questions from the floor, really. But, panel, what I propose is this. You've heard the points that are raised. Some of them were comments, some of them were questions. You're going to have a few minutes to make your closing statements. Please incorporate these questions that you heard in your closing statements, because, audience, I want you to vote again. Now, for those of you who are watching at home, if you'd like a briefing booklet on some of those issues that you've heard raised today, then please go to www.intelligencesquared.com and you can download that booklet. Anybody can do it, and it's absolutely free. Okay, so everybody is doing that. So while you're all doing that, it's going to take a little bit of time. we're going to hear the closing statements incorporating some of the points that you, the audience, raised, and we're going to do it in reverse order this time. And it's going to be Stephen Fry first.
Well, it's been a really interesting debate, and I've loved some of the questions from the floor. I suppose I'm slightly disappointed that Anne Widdecombe in particular should say, oh, I knew they'd bring up condoms and child rape and homosexuality. It's a bit like a burglar in court, so you would bring up that burglary and that manslaughter. You never mention the fact I give my father a birthday present. You know, it's, yes, are you getting the message? There is a reason we hammer home these issues, because they matter. There's such an opportunity, owning 1 billion souls at baptism. It's such an opportunity to do something remarkable to make this planet better. And it's an opportunity that is constantly and arrogantly being avoided, and I'm sorry for that.
Okay, thank you. Final statement from Conservative MP Anne Widdecombe for the motion that the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world.
Right, we have had all the usual stuff about how the Catholic Church, being against condoms, has apparently caused untold misery. As I've said, our opponents always try to home in on sex, when the teachings of the Church, which are, after all, only about the stability of family, the maintenance of fidelity, the virtue of chastity, when the Church teaches that as one part of all its teaching, I do sometimes despair at the way that these debates always come back to that. So I'm very pleased to have been here tonight, despite the fact that I think the incoming poll was slightly discouraging. I'm very pleased to have been here with the Archbishop and with the two gentlemen opposite, and thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. Against the motion, Christopher Hitchens.
Unanswered questions. Amazing. No one, though they were asked repeatedly, would say whether they thought Stephen Fry, my friend, was in a state of mortal sin or not. They wouldn't tell you. Something about the question brought out their inner coward. Well, I say that homosexuality is not just a form of sex, it's a form of love, and it deserves our respect for that reason. That when my children were young, I'd have been proud to have Stephen as their babysitter, and I'd told them they were lucky. And if anyone came to my door as a babysitter wearing holy orders, I'd call first a cab and then the police.
Final statement from our final speaker, Archbishop of Abuja, John Onaiyekan. You've got to make your final pitch now to the audience.
Thank you very much. I just want to draw the attention of the audience back to the topic. Yeah. And the topic is quite clear. The Catholic Church is a force for good in the world. It did not say it is the only source for good. It did not say it has always been a source for good. It's not in the past tense, it's in the present tense, is a source for good. I still have not seen how they have in any way shown that the Catholic Church is not a force for good in the world. I can say all kinds of things about other people, but I think it is fair enough that when it comes to what does the Church say about condoms, what does it say about homosexuality, what does we say about women priests, we need to take the trouble to find out exactly what it is saying, not what the newspapers are saying that we are saying. We never said that the Catholic Church is perfect. We continue to do our best to be as close as we can to Jesus Christ and what he wants us to be, and to constantly be a force for good in the world. And I thank you.
Archbishop, thank you. Audience, you've all voted again. Now, the Moment of Truth panel. Let me remind everybody that before the debate, when everybody came in, this is how you voted. For the motion that the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world, 678. Against the motion, 1,102. And the undecideds, The don't knows were 346. This is how you voted subsequently. For the motion that the Catholic Church is a force for good, from 678, it's gone to 268. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Against the motion, it's now 1,876. And you can see that doesn't leave very many don't knows. It's 34 undecided. So, commiserations, Archbishop and Anne Widdecombe. Congratulations, Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens. Thank you all. From me, Zainab Badawi, goodbye.